Hey everybody, David here again, and I've got a great and exciting video for you guys today because while some of you watching this video may know what custom connectors are, I'm going to cover a very weird and unusual practice that isn't well documented and it's not necessarily well known until you get into it. And even if you do know it, you may not even think about using it in this creative way. So I wanted to share some thoughts and ideas on things that I think that you might need to know. So let's talk about some of today's topics that I'll be covering. And so the first one, what we'll be discussing is obviously establishing a custom connector. And we're dealing not with the OAuth, we're simply dealing with the API keys because those are the most common use case scenarios that seem to come up when using a custom connector. And then one thing that I don't know that many of you know, because I do watch the forums on the community and I see these questions come up all the time, as well as when I'm consulting with users on the platform, as well as customers, and they're not much, nobody really seems to be aware of it. When I show them, they're like, oh man, that's crazy. And so I'm going to show you this as well. So definitely stay tuned for this. And then the next thing is the steps when making a custom connector. There's differences not only in how you do it, but in the user interface and the way that you would think that you're going to establish a custom connector, especially as it relates to security. I'm going to turn it upside down and on its head and almost ask you to forget everything that you know. So with that being said, then that begs the question to what I was just alluding to is where then do you put your authorization key in the steps and why would you choose, one method over the other? So the next one is finally, this is straightforward. All of you have that done, at least use custom connectors know this part, but for those of you that don't know it, I'll show you how to test your custom connector. And then, what do we do with this thing after we get it made, right? And so how do you then consume the custom connector? Because if you haven't consumed a custom connector in a Power App or in a Power Automate flow, then you may not really be having the experience level that you think you have or that you should have in creating a custom connector because you really need to experience what it's like to consume something that you've made. So if you're in a role or a position where you're just dealing with the administrative duties of creating custom connectors and that's all you know how to do, but somebody else is going to use the work that you produce, it's definitely good for you to get your hands dirty and at least go out there and create a custom connector and see what it's like to live a day in the life and consume the product that you actually make. So without any further ado, let's dig into this very top esoteric piece because I want you guys to understand what this means moving forward, and we'll cover this in details as we get to it. But this is the real key point or the key takeaway to this video, and then I'm going to circle back and show you the differences to the interface. And then at that point, if you want to bail off the video, that's fine. But if you're new, then I would suggest watching the whole video. But for those of you that just want to get the meat and potatoes, here we go. So what we're talking about is the authorization key and where do you put it and why do you put it in certain key places. And the first way or the high level thinking that you need to think about is there is a custom connector that you're going to make, and is this going to be a template? Or is this going to be a shared corporately governed connector that kind of everybody's going to jump on and use the same connector? In other words, they're not going to be using it as a template. They're going to be using just the one instance of this connector through and throughout your entire organization. And so some additional key considerations for this is with a custom connector as a template, if everybody that uses or consumes this custom connector, again, as a template, they're going to have their own API key. And so that means that they're probably paying for it either out of their department's budget or I don't know, any number of reasons, right? But the bottom line is if you want them to consume it as a template and have them manage their key, then that's great. But what I often find out is that this is not the use case of a custom connector. It's the latter. It's the shared corporate governed connector. And so anyone using this connector, everybody must share the same API key, but the key part, no pun intended, right? Okay, maybe it was funny a little. Anyway, the point is the consumers of this custom connector, they do not need to, or the governance around this is they should never know what the API key is. And if they did know it, then there's all this additional security concerns and issues, obviously, around that. So only the administrator of the custom connector can ever know what this API key is. And so these are the key definitions of why you're going to configure the custom connector one way as opposed to the other. Now, little secret and disclaimer is that when you follow the steps in creating the custom connector, you would think to do what you need to do following the steps because the key and the security, right, they go hand in hand. To configure the most popular use case, you don't set it up this way. You actually set it up differently, completely differently, and in a very buried and obscure way, but it works and it works fantastically. But if you don't know this, then you're going to really wind up struggling on how to implement these custom connectors. Okay, so let's dig into the user interface of the Power Platform. And what I want to show you is at the first high level, I do want to at least start so that anybody new watching this, they're not completely lost. And so the way you establish a custom connector, so I'm in the make.powerapps.com experience, and most of you are going to be here, unless you're coming from a strictly automation mentality, and then you're going to go through, Power Automate for this. I'll show you that in just a minute as well. So in the make.powerapps.com experience under Dataverse, you have connections and custom connectors. So let me break this down for the newbies. So this is very confusing when you're first starting the Power Platform. Custom connectors are essentially a template. Now, Microsoft Power Platform has over 300 pre-baked, ready-to-use connectors out of the box. Custom connectors are used when one of those 300 isn't going to work. You've got an API to another system, and the only way to get to it is by creating a custom connector. So now what's the difference between connections and custom connectors? Connections are the consumption of the connector. That means that your identification, your user authentication, I can't say that. User authentication is tied to that, or an API key, or your email address, or some authentication mechanism. Once those are consumed, then they show up in the connections. But everything starts off as a template. Remember those 300 pre-configured baked into the platform, those are templates too. And they're templates because then you have to provide the authorization mechanism. So to create a custom connector, you need to click into custom connectors, and that's what this is over here. So now this is the next part that I want you to understand. And for those of you that are advanced, you may or you may not know this. And at least from my experience, a lot of people that I talk to, they don't know this. And they go through the forums, and eventually it winds up making it to my desk, and I'm like, okay, I know what this is, this crazy scenario. What I'm about to show you, if you don't know this, it's going to blow your mind. So I'm going to establish a custom connector, right? So here we are in the make.powerapps.com experience, and here's my flows, and everything looks like I just showed you. But I'm in flows, right? Okay, and so here I have all of that information. Here I am over here in Power Automate, same interface essentially, but I'm in make.powerautomate.com. And for those of you that aren't familiar with this, this is Microsoft's new URL that is replacing flow.microsoft.com, I think it was previously. I can't even remember now. I'm just so used to using the new ones. But in any event, makepowerautomate.com is the new Power Automate URL to get to this UI, user interface. Okay, so what's the differences? So if you're using Power Automate, you know that when you create a new flow, you essentially have to figure out what type of flow it is, right? And so it doesn't matter what the flow is or what the flow isn't. You have to have the ability to use something called a trigger. And so let's just do this real quick. So I'll do an instant cloud flow. And so now I say, choose how you want to trigger. Like there has to be something that triggers this action, like on change, on this, on whatever, something has to happen to fire off this trigger. Well, now with that being said, let me go over to the make.powerapps.com. I'll get this straight yet, right? And let's go ahead and go into creating a custom connector. So I am going to click into custom connectors here. I'm going to jump over into the Power Automate. Same thing under data. I'm going to choose custom connectors. So there's first thing different, right? This just says data. over here, this is called data verse. Okay, so the subtle nuances, but at least the keyword data is there, and that might lead you to think, maybe I should click there. And if you guess that, that's great. Okay, so now when we're in here, let's establish a new custom connector. And this time we're going to do it from blank. And we'll call this one video, come on, video flow. We'll do continue. We'll come over here to the make experience. We'll do from blank. We'll do video, and we'll just call this maker because this will be from the maker side. Okay, so first, let's look at this interface here. First, we have, essentially some steps to follow, and this is general information. But all of the steps are jammed up underneath this drop-down menu. And so you have 5 steps. You have general, security, definition, code, and test. Watch what happens when we go over to Power Automate. There's no drop-down menu. It's a breadcrumb trail. Stupid, simple, no big deal, right? So you're just like, Dave, this is stupid. This is just nuances. What are you trying to show me here? Because I don't see any value. Well, here's the value. And this is the part that's going to save you from losing your mind. I want you to notice all the things that you can do in step 3 for definition. Look how many there are. Now let's go over and look at this and what this looks like in definition step 3 over in the make.com experience. Remember what I said about Power Automate and one of the things that you need to establish? Well, there's 3 here. But guess what's over here? You have a 4th item called trigger. So if you happen to be, a seasoned developer and or Power user of the Power platform, and you're like, okay, I need to create a flow, and your intention was to be able to consume this, custom connector, mostly using Power Automate, as opposed to maybe Power Apps, then if you wound up finding yourself over here going into making a custom connector, you're about to lose your mind because where are the triggers? And so I've seen people on the forums just like literally flipping out. Where did this thing go? Do I not have the proper licensing? They're trying to come up with any justification why the thing isn't there. And the reason is Microsoft has 2 distinct user interfaces. So context matters when it comes to custom connectors and where you create them. So now that you're aware of this, please, keep your hair. Don't pull it out like, I've done mine many, many times. And maybe if Microsoft is watching this, they could unify the interfaces for a better, more consistent user experience. For me personally, I'm of the opinion that it shouldn't matter which way I go and do the same things, because in true Microsoft fashion, there's multiple ways of always doing the same thing. However, what's not very Microsoft fashionable is being able to do the same things in different areas, but with different functionality, unadvertised, unsolicited, unknown. And so that leads to customer support problems. And I know you guys are all about lowering support costs. So this is one of those things that could help you lower some of those support costs and also help users adopt the platform with greater ease. Okay, so I'm going to come off of this soapbox now. And so what we're going to do is, now that we're established this, I'm going to get out of the Power Automate experience for right now because we don't need it. And what I'm doing, I don't need to establish any triggers anyway. So now that I have this, this video maker flow out here, let's go ahead and figure out what are we going to use for an API. Well, to do this, I'm going to go back to my old friend because it's really simple to use, which is Macaru. If you haven't seen my other videos, I like to use this free utility or tool, even though I personally have paid for an upscaled version of it because I use it so much all the time, especially for creating POCs and things of that nature. It's always great to have lots of custom data. And so if you want to get a plan, I got the cheap one, $60 a year. I don't get paid for it, so I don't have a link for you. Just go to macaru.com, sign up, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so Macaru, if you guys are listening, maybe sponsor some videos for me in the future. All right, in any event, what I wanted to show you, though, is we can just use one of my pre-baked schemas. The particulars of the schema Doesn't matter. If you're not sure what a schema is, don't worry about it. I'm going to go ahead and use this pre-baked August webinar schema that I have out here, because one of the things that I have is the API key, as well as, let's see, let's go under get my key. So let me go under my account. And by the way, don't try to get funny and take and steal my account API key, because I'm going to change it after this video. Or at least I hope I remember to change it, right? But no, I'm definitely going to change it. And so let me go ahead and use some notes that I had from a previous webinar that I did, where I have some of this stuff already baked in. That way I don't have to go redoing all of this. But I will have to go into here and remove my old API key, because I did the same thing there. I had to change it. All right, so now I should be able to click on this and I should get some JSON back, and I do, so at least I know that I got the right key. So let me go back here and grab this URL, because this is absolutely going to be what I need to use for the remainder of this video here. If I could copy and paste, that would be so helpful. All right, so let's just open up a brand new window, and I'm going to tear this thing apart a couple of different ways. Let's keep this whole like this, and let me just separate out the parts that I know I'm going to need moving forward in the video. And so we'll keep that down here. I won't need that. All right. Let's close this. Let's close this, and let's begin. Okay, so I'm a couple of steps ahead of myself. So here we go. Let's go ahead and create a custom connector. Now, I do happen to have an icon for this. I would highly suggest that you guys use a icon, because this will help you establish what this custom connector is. I can't tell you how many times people don't read, but they do recognize icons and logos, and they know what's what. And so this definitely will help your users. And so this, I think there's transparency on the icon that I have here, because I think it was a PNG. So for good measure, I'll give it a background of 6Fs, which is hex code for all white. Those of you that know CSS or HTML probably already know that, so that's great. And now what we need to do is establish the host. Okay, remember I told you I needed to grab out this stuff earlier, so that's exactly why I did it. So I'm going to put the host in here just like this. Now the base URL, notice it has a /, and notice that I left the / here. And you may be asking, hey, in Mockaroo, how did I know to do whatever? Well, under the help menu, it shows you what the syntax is and how to use it. I'm not going to cover it in this video. I've covered it in previous videos. I highly encourage you to go watch those other videos and or to read the documentation. Now you notice I just pasted, but I already had a /. So I'm going to remove that. And so now I'm good to go. All right, so this is where the wheels on the bus can fall off for most of you. If you remembered from my PowerPoint presentation, I told you, where do you put the authorization key? And I gave you two use case scenarios, connector template or the shared corporate governed connector. And I said the majority of you most of you would come from this intention where everybody's going to share it, and that key needs to be guarded. So with that being said, this is where the majority of you are going to think to put your key. And you're going to come down here and you're going to say, oh, I got an API key. And according to the documentation with Mockaroo, it is going to be put into the header. And so it'll be something like API. I forget actually what it is. I think it's API key. I don't know. It's not really important. API dash, let's just say key. And then you'll put the, this is the label. The parameter name is going to be API-key. We can call this API key. And so for those of you that are brand new and don't realize this, when somebody uses this, again, as a template, right, a custom connector template, it's going to prompt them for their API key. There's going to be a modal dialog box that's going to pop up. And so with this parameter name, this is the label that's on that pop-up telling the user what to put in, okay? So then there's an input box, and they're going to put their API key in. But programmatically, this is what you put in based on whatever the API requirements are, because this is the programmatic, key value pair. So behind the scenes programmatically, this is the key that's going to be used into whatever it's going to, in this case, it's going to go into the header. And then the value that they put in that text box from the modal dialog is what's going to be passed in through to your custom connector. But this is not the right thing to do. This is not what you want to do when your intention is to do it in this manner, where you have one managed API key and you don't want people to know what it is, if you're going to have people consume it and it's going to be truly a connector template, then by all means, you'll probably never find any value in this video, at least for maybe some of the exceptions that I showed you earlier, but this will always work for you, right? But again, the majority of you don't use it this way. And as a result of that, you need to choose no authentication. I know it goes against your better judgment and you're like screaming, why do I do it this way? No, I'm going to show you. So now we're going to go on to step 2. So as with all things, and like I said, Microsoft, here's a great example of it. I can use the drop down to go to definition, or I can click over here on the arrow to go to next. But see that? 2 different ways to do the same thing. Fully featured. The click doesn't work with a left click versus a right click. And so this is what I'm saying. We need to get this stuff synced up. All right, so now what we need to do is establish some actions. So if you've done any programming at all, then you know that within programming you have functions, which are often changeable, called methods. Well, if you know what those are, if you know what methods and functions are, then actions are yet another third word for this. In this particular action, we're going to create another brand new action. And so because it's an action, we need to kind of say, what is this action all about? And so the best way to do it is to simply just say, hey, listen, this is going to be a GET request because I'm going to get some data. In this case, I'm going to get generated data. So what I usually do, and this may or may not be, something that you should pay attention to. But if in doubt, just use the same name in all 3 areas. Otherwise, hey, if you want to put a good description in here, by all means, you probably should. The organization ID, this is unique to what this needs to be. So in any event, this does work. It's my either okay or bad habit. It's up to you to determine that for me. Make a comment in the comment box down below. Let me know kind of what you think about that. And we'll have a discussion about it and go from there. But if you're just looking to get things moving quickly, go ahead and do it. Now, this is another area that I see people commonly getting hung up. And even when they click learn more, they go to the documentation, which is over here, right? It's a lot to read, and maybe it's not always clear what these things are. So I'll give you my interpretation of how these work because this is key, understanding how to configure the security key in just a few moments. So the way that visibility works, so let's just assume, and this is also why I said it really helps you if you're just in a position where you're cranking out custom connectors, but you're not the person going to use them. This is why you need to use them because this is what's going to help you make better custom connectors by using good naming conventions. And so if I'm using Power Automate or I'm using Power Apps at Canvas and I try to, I use this connector, one of the methods that's going to show up is this is what's going to show up and I need to know what this thing does. And this lets me know, hey, this is going to get, and if I know what Makaru is, I'll know that, hey, this is something for a data set. And maybe that might be a better naming convention, get dataset -aug webinar. So it's telling you what it is, what its intention is at Makaru, and then giving kind of the name of the data set in one fell swoop so that you kind of know what that is. So that's, again, naming convention and completely up to you. But what matters is this. If you choose and leave it as default, none, Microsoft will determine in its connector where this needs to be. So the first couple of actions that you add will be front and center and easy to get to, but this probably applies more to Power Automate than Canvas apps. But nonetheless, if you've ever used Power Automate and you choose an action on a connector, some things are front and center and others are buried under what's called the advanced or more button. And so if you choose this option, that's where you can bury this as important, but maybe not as significant front and center as it needs to be. Internal, we're going to show you this here, and this is key to pulling off this other shared corporate governance connector here. And so internal means that this is internal to just the flow. Anybody consuming the connector will never see the information. So if I set it as internal, nobody's ever going to be able to use this method or this action or this function or whatever you want to call it. And so in the context of this, internal for this particular item at this stage is not good. And so for what I usually do is I usually just make it important because I want to make it as easy as possible for people to get to unless there's a really known reason that this is something that is cool to have and or see, but I don't want to muddy the waters up with too many choices, then maybe I might want to choose the advanced in that use case. So that's what you choose and why you would choose, the appropriate visibility radio dial. And so, with that understanding, then that's really good and helpful. All right, now this is where things start to get very sticky and very tricky. So make sure you pay attention here because I'm going to try to go fast enough to move forward, but not so slow that I'm going to bore everybody on, the video watching this. So first thing we do is we need to import a sample. So according to the documentation of Makaru, and sometimes it's like this, there is a confusion sometimes around get versus post. So this is a generation of sample data. So I understand why the developers over there chose post, because essentially this is doing an action, and that action is going to result in some returned information. And so it could be argued either way. Honestly, you could choose get, and I think it does work, but I just want to stick to the way that I do know for a fact that it works. And so I'm going to use post here. Now I'm going to go back over to my notes, and I'm going to grab this full string over here so that I can get what I know that works. If I could get my Alt Tab keys working properly, then that would make all the difference in the world. So I pasted in this entire string. And again, I know that this string works because, oh dear Lord, come on. When I clicked on this, I know that it opens up the browser and I get this nice return. So I do know that in fact that the URL is working because I've tested it. And you should test it as well too. So this is really all I need for right here. Now, for this API, for you, your API may require additional headers and it may require additional information in the body. So you should also go ahead and do this, okay? So this is very, very, very important. Now, I want you to notice something else here. Now, this is almost esoteric knowledge number 2, and this applies to the body. It also applies to the header. What if you need dynamic information? Dynamic information will be information that the maker or the Power Automate user will maybe want to come in and supplement and provide their own value. That could be provided here in the URL. It could be provided here in the header, or it could be provided here in the body. And I want you to know the way that this works. So if we come over here and I blow up here this item, so this one, the first thing after the actual URL. So this is the regular URL, but the first parameter always has to show up as a question mark. In this case, we're passing in the key, but every subsequent parameter thereafter, and you can see I've got 2 of them because the reason you know that there's 2 of them is because I have 2 ampersands. Okay, this guy says additional parameter and this and that, but you start off the parameter string sequence. The first one always has to start with a question mark. So if you didn't know that, I wanted to explain that there. Okay, so assuming you do know that, that's all well, good, and fine. But the question is, what if I want to have maybe I want the key here just like it is, but I don't want to have key value. I simply just want to prompt the user to do it. And so the way that you'll do, let's do this 2 different ways. So I'm going to leave it just the way that I have it. I don't want to make any changes because I want you to see the difference. So I'm going to choose import because that's all I need for here. Now, when I do that, look what happens. You see this? I have path, I have query, and I have headers. And then I also have body down here, okay? And notice there's nothing in either of these areas because, I don't know how to get that there. And so I'm going to show you actually how to do that. But in this example, you may be saying, oh, I don't really know how to use it that way. And so let me show you how to do it. I'm going to create another action. We're just going to make this a junk action. So I'm just going to put any old gook up in here. Come on, just put anything. Let's just get going because what I want to show you is this. So let's do post again. And this time, let's come over to here and let's do it this way. I don't want, let's just do question mark. Let's pick this up here. So we've got key, schema, and count, right? So I'm going to paste this in here, and here's the JSON, see? So I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to do and, now this is the key. I'm using 2 curly braces, opening and closing. And I'm going to put key, and then I'm going to do, so usually the way that this works, let me do it the right way. So after JSON, as opposed to the key, I'm going to do /key, forward slash, I think it was count. So again, curly braces, count, forward slash. Let's see, we got key, we got count, and we have, what was the other one? Schema. Okay, SCHEMA. Okay, so we've got key, count, and schema in the curly braces. Now I have forward slashes. Now this is called ordinal positioning with regards to dynamic parameters. Okay, so watch what happens now. Because I've done forward slash, you see the way the parameters work over here in this, it's key and then its value. And so the way that it works in this regard is you don't provide key value, you simply just provide the value. There is no identification. The ordinal position, programmatically, the person who made the API, they know that the first forward slash is the position for the key. They know that the second ordinal position is going to be for the count. They know that, so on and so forth. And so you don't need to know that. You just need to follow the API. But in order to make it dynamic, you need to provide these curly braces. And once you do that, now look, see, under path, I have those same options available to me, but they're still in the query, right? But they're ordinal positions, the way that I've done it. But the key is to get them to show up in the path or headers or body, you need to put these in curly braces. So that's the takeaway. Don't forget that. I need you to remember that because that's what's going to be important for you to not get confused later. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that because we're going to work through what we originally started. But I did want to show you, hey, how do I get this to show up for path or query or for headers or for body? And of course, that knowledge also goes through if you're using OAuth and things of that nature. This is how Power Automate does the custom connectors work within the Power Platform. All right, so now we have these query parameters, but you can click into each one of these and set additional parameters. And so this is what we're going to do for the key. This is the secret to the sauce. When I hit edit, in here is going to allow us to pull off this shared corporate governed connector. And you may be saying, okay, well, that's great. Well, how do we do that? So again, the name is fine, the description is fine, the summary is fine, the default value is not fine. So what we need to do is come back over here. I'm going to grab my key, and here this is right here. So we're popping that into the key. Now here's the key. No pun intended again. We need to make this required. Okay, so required and a default value. By setting it required, it means it's going to be here. And technically, I don't think you need to set it this way, but I always just err on the side of caution, making sure that it is required. And because I'm providing a default value, we've kind of automatically assumed and made it its default value. But here's the key. I keep saying that key. I don't mean to do that. Here's the point, okay? We want to make sure that this is internal. By setting it internal, remember, it keeps it internal to the process of the connector itself. It will never be visible by the user, the maker consuming this connector because it's internal to its own process. And so by doing this, we now can configure this in such a way that it accomplishes this outcome. And the outcome is I want a shared corporate governed connector. So this only allows the system administrators to see this default value because unless you're in here configuring it, you're never ever going to know what this key is. The other thing to make sure that its data type is correct. So this is a string in the context of how this needs to be used. Yes, it is a string. So I'm going to go ahead and click back. So now I need to go down and look at the rest of my parameters, and here is schema. Okay, now schema is a parameter that I need to provide, but because I provided this as aug webinar, I automatically know that this is the aug webinar. And if I let the end user choose which schema to choose, especially as it relates to the context of how Makaru is, they're going to get different data sets, different data types, different amount of columns that's going to come back based on the schema chosen. So I want to restrict that. I want to make sure that this particular action always gets this particular schema, and I don't want somebody to fat finger it to create or generate a support ticket for me, which then is going to just drive me mad. So if I take the responsibility off of the end user, then what happens is that I have full control over this, and nobody has to make any support requests because they didn't put something in wrong. So again, just like we did the key, I'm doing the same thing for the schema. I'm providing the default value, making it required, setting it to internal so they can never get to it, and its data type is string, and I'm okay with that. So the only configurable value that the end user needs to be concerned with is this count. Because I have it built in here that I always want to make sure that count is provided, I got a couple of options here. I can set its default value to 10 to make sure that they always don't request an insane amount of records, or maybe I just want to do 2, right? Let's just set it to default value is 2. Then I don't have to make it required. But if I do it as blank, then I'm going to need to make it required because there needs to be a value there. Otherwise, it's going to default to 1,000 on the Mockaroo side. And some APIs don't even have that. So be very careful on how you configure this, know how the API works, know what the expectations are around it, because this is what's going to determine how you handle it here. So I'm going to set 2. I'm still going to leave it as required because I always leave it as the best practice. And I choose important because I do want it to be front and center in front of the user's face. And this is an integer. It's a count of how many records I want to come back. So it did a good job, but sometimes it doesn't do a good job. Always, always, always make sure you check your type. Make sure the data type is in fact the data type you were expecting. So with that said, all of this is good and done.
Okay, now we're coming down the road here to the final steps, and what we need to do is to configure a response. And if you're not sure what the response is, basically you ask the API to do something or for something, and it will respond in kind with whatever it needs to do. In scope to what we're doing here, this will be returning us some generated data known as mockup data or sample test data based on the schema that we had provided it, and then it will return the amount of fields based on I think we got 2 as a default that we chose. Otherwise, we can pass in the parameter and tell it 100, 1,000. If I'm using the free version of Mockaroo, if you have a paid version, then like I do, I paid $60 a year, and I can't remember. I get like 100,000 or something per day that I can pull out. So I could ask for many. Obviously, as you know, with Power Apps, anything over 5,000 records, even if you come up with creative ways of dealing with it, those large data sets just start to become unusable as you load up your application with too much junk. So in any event, as you can see right here, it comes up with this, we got this default sample output, which is just junk, right? There's nothing there. But what we need to do is import the response that we get back. So I'm just going to copy this. This came as a result of clicking on or through this link that I used to test, and then it opens in a browser, and then we can see the response here. So if we capture that response to the clipboard, and then come back over here to our custom connector and click on this import from sample. In this particular API's example, I just need to provide the input that was received from the body. And if your API has additional information, maybe you're using Postman or something like that, and you do know that there's specific headers that come back and you need them, then this is where you will go ahead and configure that and provide the additional information. However, for the purposes of this more simpler API, I don't need it, and I can simply just press import. Now what this does is it brings back schema, all of the fields that I specified in my schema, and this is why you go ahead and you tell it under the request area. Actually, where am I? I got a little spun around here. Yeah, in the request area, that I am going to hard code in this schema and make it internal, because this particular schema that I have on Mockaroo brings back a very specific amount or certain key fields. And if I were to choose another schema, potentially I could get back not potentially, I will get back more than likely a bunch of different columns, a bunch of different fields. So it's better to hard code that into the request. And if you need to make actions for additional schemas, just create more actions. But by using good naming conventions, the user will know what they're consuming. The user will know what to expect. So a good example of this is maybe you have a couple of HR applications and you have a particular schema designed for HR. So get HR schema. If you have something for finance, it would be, get, I don't know, something finance. It could be accounts receivable, accounts payable. I don't know, whatever your table is. But the point is, set these up very logically so that the user can consume them in a way that makes sense to them. All right, so now with the request and the response fully configured, and you know how to deal with the path, the query, the header, the body stuff, because we've shown all of that. The next thing that we need to do essentially is just press save connector or update connector. I went ahead and hit save in between my steps here, so I just have to choose update. And then when the update connector is done, we're going to go over to the test area because we can skip over 4. This is if you want to do some custom code, some C#, .NET, that kind of stuff. And this can help you maybe do additional programming or logic or parsing behind the scenes. So a lot of extra additional power that you can do here if you know traditional development. So I don't need to use it in this example. I'm just going to skip on over to test. And the first thing that we need to do is to create a connector. Remember, I showed you, or we talked about the differences between connections and custom connector. I made my custom connector, which is now a template. And now I need to consume it as a consumer or a maker or whatever. And I need to establish a link to the connection. This is the part here that would pop up the modal dialog box and ask us for the API key. If in step number 2, security, we chose to add our API key there. This is where it would pop up because I'm now trying to use the template of the connector as an actual connector that I'm going to make, and it becomes a connection. So I'm going to go ahead and, I don't know, I got some weird funky naming going on up here. So let me fix my blah, blah, blah up here. Apparently I can't adjust the connector name at this level. Oh no. I hope I didn't bail on everything here. Let's see. Can I change it here? Double click. No, it's not going to let me update the name. Dag nabbit. And I bet I lost my changes too. But I hit save and update, so hopefully not. Let's see if I can... I don't see any renaming. This is most bizarre. So, this is utterly crazy. I wonder if I can go into the Swagger and do it. So honestly, I got myself into a situation where, unfortunately, I've never had to rename one of these, to be honest with you. Test. I think I know why. I think because I created a connection, I have to go out here and kill this. No, didn't I create a connection? I did, didn't I? Refresh. This video is already too long as it is, and I do apologize. Not that this is important enough or to be critical. I may just wind up leaving it the way that it is. So, unfortunately, there's all these weird nuances that come up, and this is one of them. Yeah, so most bizarre. All right, let's go ahead and create it. So anyway, now I got this funny name that apparently I can't seem to change for whatever reason. I don't know why it's grayed out, to be honest with you. I would have sworn that I changed the name of these custom connectors before, but it's completely grayed out. I can't change it in, after the fact, in the fact, whatever. I literally would have to go ahead and delete it and recreate it. Why? I don't know. So, most bizarre. Anyway, so it is what it is. That being said, where are we at? All right, so we need to go ahead and test this now. And as you can see, we've got the default. We'll do the test operation, blah, 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 blah. We got a 200 response, and we have 2 records. So with this being said, now let's go ahead and create an app very quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time consuming this API inside of a Canvas app. This, I don't mind having blah, blah, blah as a junk name. All right. Good Lord, it's taking forever. Come on. Okay, so now we're ready to consume the connector. So let's go into our connections or data sources, and we can spin open connectors and scroll all the way to the bottom and get it, or we could have just gone VID, Actually, not at this level. Add data. It's in this search box. I always get those mixed up. VIDEO. There we go. All right, so closer to the top of the pile. Anyway, we've got a connector in our application. Now let's go ahead and consume it. So let's do this. Let's take our insert button and let's put an input. Let's do a text input, and we'll put this over here. And we'll change this to, actually, let's just make sure that let's use some constraints. Let's make the format is a number. And at this point, let's take a button. Let's put a button out here. And we'll rename the button to get. I double clicked on the button in case you were wondering. That's how we got into it. And at that point, this is all good. And for the action, let's give this text box some good programmatic naming as opposed to just junk. So btn get. And we'll do this as txt count. That way we know what's what. So now with this being said, the event here we're going to do is we're going to create a collection, COL, clear collect, COL, MOCKDATA, mock data. And now we're going to call the connection video maker, and I got a choice. I can, pull up the main item here, and using dot notation, I can dig in. Unfortunately, I only have one, right? And then here I see the count. So I'm going to make this dynamic. We're going to refer to the txt count value or text. Is it value or text? I never know. Yep. In this instance, it's text. And then we'll put two double quotes there. So now this will create our collection. So now I need to have a gallery out here. And we're going to go ahead and use that collection to show stuff into our items. And we're going to choose our fields. So this comes from the response that we did earlier. So we'll do first name, we'll do last name, we'll do email, we'll do date of birth, and we'll wrap up the social security number because we don't really need to see the ID. And programmatically, this is all said and done. Here we go. All right, so now we've got everything configured. And so now let's go ahead and play this app. And let's just say I want 3 records, which will override the default. And so I'll go ahead and I'll choose get. And the get will now provide me 3 records. If I say 200, it will go out to the API using the custom connector and bring me back 200 records. With that being said, here we go. We're going to go ahead and create a new flow. Let's do an instant flow. We're going to manually trigger this. We're going to create it. At this point, let's go ahead and choose a new step. No, I can get to it over here. Okay, so I'm an idiot. That being said, let's go ahead and create this out. Here's the count. Let's do 10. And let's do new step. And let's do a compose. If I could type. And we'll choose the output of the above connector. As soon as I pick one of these, I guarantee it's going to throw this in a loop and iterate it, which is fine. Okay, so now we can iterate through all of the records, and it's very important that we choose not a bunch of records, but maybe let's just drop this down to 5. So let's go ahead and test this so that we can see this in action. So we're going to manually test this the first go around, and we should get 5 items in our iteration. And let's look at trying to scroll down, but it won't. Okay, so now we've got Milt for the first name. And here comes Kristen for the second name. Anyway, I just keep clicking next and we'll go all the way to the end of the record set. But in any event, we were able to consume both the custom connector now in Canvas apps as well as Power Automate. And this is how you use, make, and create custom connectors. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like and subscribe. That's it for this video. We'll see you in the next one. Have a good day. Bye-bye.